The hallway smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, clean enough to sting, tired enough to feel like surrender. Marcus Reed stood under a flickering fluorescent light, his jacket still damp at the shoulders, his hands still shaking the way they did after cold water and fear. He had pressed his palms together like prayer, but nothing about him felt holy. He looked like a man trying to hold the world in place with fingers that had already started to slip. Across the corridor, Cassandra Ashford sat on a plastic chair with her knees pulled close, hair pinned back too neatly for a night like this. Her face, so familiar from magazine covers, looked smaller in hospital lighting. Human. Vulnerable. A doctor stepped out holding a clipboard like it weighed more than it should. "Mr. Reed," the doctor said, voice level almost practiced. "We need to talk about Ava." Marcus's throat tightened. In the silence that followed, Cass lowered her gaze to her own arm. Slowly, like she was peeling back a curtain she'd hidden behind for years, she pushed up the sleeve of her sweater. The scars were pale in the harsh light, irregular lines that didn't ask for pity but carried a story anyway. Marcus looked at them and didn't flinch. He only whispered so quiet the hallway almost swallowed it. "They're not proof you failed. They're proof you lived." Cass blinked hard as if the words had hit a place she didn't know was still bleeding. And that was the moment right there between a doctor's warning and a woman's exposed pain that Marcus realized healing wasn't a soft thing. It was a choice to stay, a choice to be seen, a choice to step back from the edge, whatever that edge looked like for you. To understand how Marcus Reed and Cassandra Ashford ended up in that hallway, you have to go back a few weeks, to a bridge named Greystone and a river that didn't care how rich or poor you were. Riverton was a city built around water. It didn't just have a river. It had a river that owned it. The Evergreen cut through downtown like a long, cold vein, reflecting streetlights and winter skies with the same indifferent patience. In November and December, the rain didn't fall. It hovered as if the whole city was holding its breath. Marcus Reed knew that rain. He wore it like a second layer. He was a black man in his mid-30s with hands rough from rebar and concrete shoulders shaped by years of lifting what other people didn't want to carry. His work boots lived by the door. His lunchbox smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee because even when you washed out a hard life, it left traces. And Marcus had learned 3 years ago that grief left traces too. Naomi Reed. His wife had died in a hospital room that was too bright, too quiet, too full of machines that beeped like they were counting down to something no one wanted to name. Cancer had taken her slowly, like it had time, and Marcus didn't. Since then, Marcus's life had narrowed into a single mission: keep Ava safe. Ava Reed was 8, maybe 9, depending on whether you counted her birthday by the calendar or by the way she had started to look at the world. She had eyes that missed nothing, and a voice that didn't waste words. When she smiled, it was careful, like she was rationing joy. When she laughed, it surprised even her. She also had a medical file thicker than any child deserved. There were tests, follow-up scans. There were days she seemed like any other kid fighting with her shoelaces, begging for extra syrup on pancakes, and days she looked pale under the kitchen light, moving slowly as if her bones were tired. Marcus had learned to read her the way a man learns weather, the small shifts that told you when a storm was coming. He also had habits he didn't talk about, like checking her breathing at night, like keeping a small, worn ring, his wedding band, inside the pocket of his jacket, as if he could touch it and remember how it felt to be part of something steady. On the other side of Riverton's world lived Cassandra Ashford. Cassandra Cass, when she remembered to be human, was the kind of woman people described in numbers: net worth, market share, valuation growth. She was the CEO of Ashford Systems, a tech company that had grown fast enough to make investors dizzy. She lived in a glass penthouse that looked down at the city like the city was a product. She moved through meetings the way Marcus moved through construction sites, quick, controlled, always aware of danger. But Cass had a wound no headline could name. When she was 12, her parents died in a house fire. People called it a tragedy, but Cass had grown up calling it something else. A verdict. She'd survived. They hadn't. And inside her, that math never balanced. Cass wore long sleeves even in summer. She wore confidence like armor. She smiled on camera and made people believe the world was easier than it was. And still, some nights, the silence in her penthouse was so heavy it felt like drowning without water. The motif of Cass's life wasn't luxury, it was emptiness. The motif of Marcus's life wasn't poverty, it was fear. And neither of them realized yet that the Evergreen River was waiting to tie their lives together with cold, unforgiving hands. The day it happened, the hospital appointment had drained Marcus in the way only hospitals could. They hadn't delivered bad news, at least not the kind that came in one sharp sentence, but they hadn't delivered comfort either. They'd delivered monitoring caution, and we'll keep an eye on it, which was, doctor language for nothing is certain. Ava held Marcus's hand as they walked out into the damp afternoon. She wore a puffy jacket and a knit hat with a little pom-pom on top. The hat was ridiculous. Marcus loved it anyway. "Can we get cocoa?" Ava asked as they passed the vending machines. Marcus looked at the price and did a quick calculation in his head: rent, groceries, gas, copay, the meds. The insurance always seemed to reevaluate. He nodded anyway. "Yeah, we can get cocoa." Ava watched him feed the machine. "You always say yes when you don't want to." Marcus glanced down at her, startled. "What?" "You do that thing," she said, like she was explaining a scientific observation. "Your eyebrows do the thing, and then you say yes anyway." Marcus tried to smile. "Maybe I just like cocoa." Ava didn't argue. She just took the cup and blew across the top carefully. "You're a bad liar, Daddy." The rain followed them to the car. The wipers squeaked like they were complaining. Marcus drove with both hands on the wheel the way he did when his mind was crowded. Ava looked out the window and counted bridges in her head like she always did. She liked bridges because they made the city feel connected. They made it seem like nothing was truly cut off. When they reached Greystone Bridge, traffic slowed. A police car was parked on the shoulder farther ahead, lights off, like it had been there for something that didn't want attention. Marcus frowned. "Stay buckled." "Okay." Ava nodded, sipping cocoa. "Okay." As they rolled forward, Marcus saw her. A woman stood near the railing just beyond the sidewalk lamp. She wore a long coat that probably cost more than Marcus's rent. Her hair was pulled back and the wind kept trying to undo it. She was too still, not like someone looking at the river, like someone listening to it. Marcus's chest tightened, not because he knew her, but because he recognized the posture. Grief had a posture. Desperation did too. A gust of wind hit hard, shoving rain sideways. The woman's heels slipped on the wet pavement. She reached for the railing, fingers missing by an inch. And then, one heartbeat later, she was gone. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was fast and quiet and wrong. Ava gasped, cocoa spilling over the rim of the cup. Daddy Marcus didn't think. He pulled the car over so hard the tires hissed. He shoved the door open and ran. He heard Ava's small voice calling after him, panicked, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't do nothing. Not again. Not after Naomi. Not after all those nights praying for a miracle that never came. Marcus vaulted the barrier like his body remembered how to move before his brain could argue. Cold hit his face like a slap. Then the world became water. The Evergreen River was brutal. It didn't welcome you. It punished you for entering. Marcus hit the surface and the shock stole his breath. He forced himself under eyes open, searching through blurred gray. He saw her coat twisting like a dark flag. He grabbed fabric, then wrist, then pulled. Her body was heavy in a way that wasn't about weight, but about surrender. Marcus kicked upward with every ounce of strength he had left. His lungs burned. His muscles screamed. Somewhere above the sky was a smear of white. When he broke the surface, he gasped like he'd been born again. He kept his grip on her. He could hear shouting from the bridge. He could see faces leaning over the rail. He didn't care. He only cared that she breathed. He dragged her toward the bank, fighting the current like he was wrestling fate. By the time hands reached down to help pull them up, Marcus's limbs were numb, and his heart felt like it might explode from effort. The woman coughed one harsh, ugly cough, and water spilled from her mouth. Marcus almost collapsed with relief. Ava was crying on the sidewalk, eyes huge, cheeks wet. Daddy Marcus tried to stand. His legs buckled. He looked at Ava and forced a smile that probably looked like pain. "I'm okay," he lied because fathers always did. Somewhere in the chaos, someone said the woman's name. Cassandra Ashford. My God, that's Cassandra Ashford. Marcus didn't know who that was, but he knew the look on her face as she lay shivering on wet concrete, eyes, wide lips blue, the expression of someone who had been pulled back into a life she wasn't sure she wanted. Ambulances came quickly. Riverton wasn't a big city, but it was the kind that had learned to respond fast to trouble. Sirens cut through the rain like warning bells. Marcus sat in the ambulance wrapped in a thin foil blanket that did nothing against the cold. His teeth chattered uncontrollably. Ava sat beside him, still holding her cocoa cup like it was a lifeline. A paramedic checked her temperature, then glanced at Marcus's soaked clothes. "You jumped?" the paramedic asked, incredulous. Marcus nodded once. Talking felt expensive. The paramedic's eyes flicked to Cass, who was in the other ambulance, also wrapped in foil hair plastered to her face. "You saved her," the paramedic said. Marcus stared straight ahead. "I did what anyone would." The paramedic didn't respond because they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would. At Riverton Children's Hospital, the warmth hit them like a wave. Nurses moved fast. Someone took Ava's coat. Someone put Marcus in a wheelchair even though he protested. Someone guided Cass down a separate hallway. Marcus caught a glimpse of her as they wheeled him past her face without makeup, her eyes red with shock, her lips pressed tight like she was holding back something bigger than cold. She looked at Marcus. For the first time, their eyes met properly. In her gaze was something Marcus didn't expect from a woman who looked like she belonged on billboards. Gratitude, yes, but also something like recognition. Like she'd seen the same hollow place inside him that she carried inside herself. Hours later, after blankets and warm IV fluids and doctor checks, Marcus sat on the edge of a hospital bed in a small room while Ava lay under a heated blanket, sleepy but stable. He brushed her hair back gently. "You scared me." Ava's voice was quiet. "You scared me too." Marcus swallowed. "I'm sorry." Ava looked at him, eyes half-lidded. "You did the right thing." Marcus let out a breath that sounded like defeat. "How do you know?" "Because you're you," Ava said like it explained everything. A knock came at the door. Marcus turned tense, expecting a nurse. Instead, Cass stood there. She had changed into hospital scrubs and a borrowed sweater. The expensive coat was gone. The image of the unstoppable CEO was gone too. She looked ordinary. And that somehow made her more dangerous to Marcus's heart than any power suit ever could. "Mr. Reed," she said softly. Marcus rose, protective instinct sharpening. "Is she okay?" he asked immediately, thinking she meant Ava. Cass nodded quickly. "She's stable. They told me." Marcus frowned. "Why are you here?" Cass hesitated as if she wasn't used to not having the perfect answer prepared. "Because you saved my life," she said. "And I didn't get to say Marcus cut her off. You don't owe me anything." Cass's eyes tightened. "I know." Silence stretched. Then Cass's gaze flicked to Ava sleeping. "She's beautiful," Cass said quietly. Marcus's voice softened despite himself. "Yeah." Cass inhaled like she was about to step onto thin ice. I asked the hospital billing department to put your expenses on my account." Marcus froze. "What?" Cass's cheeks flushed. "The hypothermia evaluation, the meds, the follow-ups. No, Marcus said sharply, the word coming out like a slap. No, you can't do that. Cass flinched, and Marcus immediately hated himself for it. But pride, no, not pride. Something sharper. Dignity. Survival. The need to not be someone's charity case. Cass lifted her hands slightly. I'm not doing it to humiliate you. I'm doing it because I need to do something that isn't just words. Marcus's jaw clenched. I didn't save you for money. I know, Cass said, voice cracking just a little. That's why it matters. Marcus looked at Ava again, the child he had to protect. The bills that kept stacking. The fear that lived in the corners of his life. He turned back to Cass. 6 months. He asked, voice low. That's what they said. 6 months. Cass nodded once. 6 months. Marcus stared at her, suspicion and gratitude battling in his chest like two wolves. Why, he asked. Cass's eyes shimmered. Because when I fell, the river felt like it was finally quiet. And then you... She stopped, swallowing hard. And then you pulled me back. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. Cass took a step back as if she'd already overstepped. I won't tell anyone. No press, no statement. It stays between us. If you want me to stop, I will. Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to accept. He wanted to live in a world where Ava didn't need anyone else's help. But the world wasn't fair, and Marcus was tired of pretending it was. He exhaled slowly. I don't want Ava to feel like she owes you. Cass's face softened. She won't. Marcus nodded once sharp. Then you do it quietly. No strings. Cass's voice came out almost like relief. No strings. She glanced at Ava again and whispered, barely audible, Thank you. Then she left. Marcus sat back down, staring at the door after she'd gone, feeling something shift in his chest. Something that hadn't moved in a long time. Not hope. Not yet. But something like the memory of it. Weeks passed. Life didn't become easier, but it became threaded. Marcus returned to work. The construction site didn't care that he'd saved a life. Steel still had to be hauled. Concrete still had to be poured. Men still shouted over machines. The city still rose, one floor at a time, indifferent to the people doing the lifting. Ava went to school. Marcus attended checkups. He watched her like a man watching a candle flicker in wind. And somewhere behind all of that, there was Cass. Not as a headline, not as a celebrity, as a presence. The first sign came when Marcus stopped by the pharmacy to pick up Ava's medication. He'd braced himself for the total, already rearranging his mental budget. The pharmacist typed, frowned, then looked up. Your copay is covered. Marcus stiffened. Covered by what? The pharmacist shrugged. A private sponsor. It's already handled. Marcus left the pharmacy with the bag in his hand and anger in his chest. Anger was safer than gratitude. Anger made him feel in control. He drove straight to River and Roast Cafe without even realizing he'd decided to. He texted the number Cass had given him the night at the hospital, a number that felt too direct to belong to someone like her. We need to talk. Her reply came almost immediately. I'll be there. River and Roast sat near the evergreen river, its windows fogged with warmth. It smelled like espresso and cinnamon. Marcus chose a table by the window because he didn't like feeling trapped. When Cass walked in, heads turned subtle, quick, like people couldn't help themselves. Even in a simple sweater and jeans, Cass carried something that made people watch. But she didn't look at them. She looked at Marcus. And for the first time, Marcus saw exhaustion in her face that no amount of money could mask. Cass slid into the chair across from him. Hi. Marcus didn't bother with greetings. He pulled the pharmacy receipt from his pocket and slid it across the table. Cass glanced at it, then looked up calmly. You found out. Marcus's voice was tight. I said no strings. There are no strings, Cass said gently. Marcus, you're a father. I'm someone who owes you more than I can say. Let me do this. Marcus's hands curled into fists. You think this is doing something? This is you buying silence. Buying peace. Buying. Cass flinched, then steadied herself. I'm not buying anything. I'm trying to repay a debt. Marcus leaned forward, voice low. A debt doesn't exist if I didn't ask for it. Cass held his gaze. You didn't ask. That's why I'm here. The waitress came, asked for their order. Cass requested black coffee. Marcus asked for water because his throat felt like it was full of gravel. When the waitress left, Cass's hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup that arrived a moment later. It surprised Marcus. CEOs weren't supposed to tremble. Cass stared out the window at the river. Do you know what it feels like, she asked quietly, to have everything people say they want, and still wake up feeling like you're empty? Marcus didn't answer. Cass continued anyway, voice soft like confession. My life is meetings and plans and contracts. People smile at me like they're smiling at a door they want opened. And at the end of the day, I go home and the penthouse is so quiet I can hear my own thoughts. And my thoughts are cruel. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't want to relate. He didn't want to understand her. Understanding made you care. Cass swallowed. When I was 12, my parents died in a fire. Marcus's eyes flicked up sharply. Cass didn't look at him. She kept watching the river as if the water was safer than his face. I got out, she said. They didn't. People told me I was lucky. They told me I was strong. They told me I survived. Her fingers tightened on the cup, but all I heard was, "Why you?" Marcus's chest tightened in a different way now. Cass finally turned to him. Her eyes were glossy but steady. You saved me, she said. Not because you knew me, not because you wanted anything. You did it because you couldn't watch someone disappear. Marcus looked down at his hands, the calluses, the cracks, the proof of work. I lost my wife, he said, quieter than he expected. 3 years ago. Cancer. Cass's face softened immediately, like she could feel the weight of that word. Marcus stared at the table as he spoke, because looking at Cass made him feel too exposed. She was everything. And I watched her fade. I watched her become smaller. I watched her try to smile for Ava even when she couldn't stand. His voice broke on the last word and he hated it. He cleared his throat. So when I saw you on that bridge, I didn't see a stranger. I saw another ending I couldn't stop. Cass's voice came out like a whisper. So you jumped. Marcus nodded once. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but heavy. Like two people standing in the same storm without umbrellas. Cass reached slowly into her bag and pulled out a plain envelope. She slid it across the table. Marcus stiffened. What is that? Cass's gaze held his. A letter. Not money. Not a contract. Just words. You can throw it away if you want. Marcus didn't touch it. Cass leaned back slightly as if giving him space. The press is starting to sniff around, she said quietly. My team saw footage. Someone posted it online. They're trying to spin it already. Marcus's stomach tightened. Spin it? How? Cass's lips pressed together. You can guess. Marcus could. A black construction worker. A wealthy tech CEO. A story ripe for cruelty, for stereotypes, for scandal, for insinuations. Cass's eyes sharpened with something like fury. They want me to hide. They want me to release a statement that erases you. That turns you into a Good Samaritan footnote while they keep my image clean. Marcus's voice was flat. That's what people like you do. Cass flinched. Is it? Marcus regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth. Cass didn't argue. She only said, I don't want to do that. Marcus exhaled long and slow. Then don't. Cass's eyes held his. What if they come for you? For Ava. Marcus's shoulders tensed. They already do. In different ways. Cass nodded like she understood more than he'd said. When Marcus finally stood to leave, Cass's voice stopped him. "Marcus," she said, "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just trying to be less alone." Marcus didn't turn fully. He kept his gaze on the floor because if he looked at her too long, he might see something he wasn't ready to name. He said only, "Don't make my life harder." Cass's voice was barely audible. "I won't." The story broke on a Monday. Marcus saw it first on his lunch break, scrolling while sitting on a beam high above the ground, legs dangling over the skeleton of a new building. Ashford CEO in Secret River Romance. The headline was cheap. The photo was worse. Cass and Marcus at River and Roast captured through glass Cass's hand mid-gesture. Marcus's face turned slightly away. The comments under it were a swamp. Some called Marcus a hero. Some called him a gold digger. Some made jokes that were sharp enough to cut skin. Marcus's foreman nudged him with an elbow. "That you?" he asked, half laughing, half serious. Marcus didn't answer. He stared at the screen until the words blurred. At home that night, Ava did her homework quietly. Marcus moved around the kitchen like a man avoiding landmines. Ava looked up suddenly. "People are talking about you." Marcus froze. "Where did you hear that?" Ava shrugged. "Kids at school. Their parents talk. They repeat it." Marcus's chest tightened. "What did they say?" Ava hesitated, eyes narrowing like she was deciding how much truth he could handle. "That you're dating a rich lady." Marcus's jaw clenched. "And what did you say?" Ava studied him. "I said you saved her from falling in the river." Marcus's hands trembled as he reached for a mug. He forced himself to breathe. "That's all." Ava tilted her head. "Are you dating her?" Marcus's voice came out too fast. "No." Ava watched him carefully. "Are you friends?" Marcus hesitated. That hesitation was an answer. Before he could speak, his phone buzzed. "Cass, I'm sorry. I didn't want this." Marcus stared at the message, anger rising like heat. He typed back, "This is exactly what I didn't want." Seconds later, his phone rang. Marcus almost didn't answer. But Ava was watching him, and he didn't want her to see him run from things. He picked up. "Yeah." Cass's voice was tight-controlled, CEO voice fighting with human voice. "Marcus, listen to me. I can shut this down." "You can't shut people down," Marcus snapped. "You can't shut down how they look at me, at my daughter." Cass's breath caught. I know. But I can make a statement." Marcus laughed once bitter. "A statement. Right, because that always fixes it." Cass's voice sharpened. "I'm not trying to fix it with PR. I'm trying to not leave you alone in it." Marcus closed his eyes, exhaustion pressing on his skull. "You don't belong here," he said the words, cold, protective, cruel. "You belong in your world, and we belong in ours." Cass went silent. Marcus heard his own heartbeat pounding like a warning. Then Cass said very quietly, "Do you think I haven't tried to stay in my world?" Marcus swallowed. Cass continued, voice trembling now. "Do you think I haven't tried to be what they want? I've been that woman. The perfect CEO, the untouchable brand. And every night I went home and felt like a ghost." Marcus pressed a hand to his forehead. "Ava's health isn't stable," he said, voice breaking despite his attempt to keep it hard. I can't add chaos. I can't let someone become important and then..." He couldn't finish. Cass's voice softened immediately. "And then lose them." Marcus's silence answered. Cass exhaled. "I'm not asking you to make me important. I'm asking you to let me be present, in the only way I know how, truthfully. Marcus clenched his jaw. Truthfully gets you eaten alive. Cass's voice turned firm. Then I'll be eaten alive. The next day, Cass held a short press conference outside Ashford Systems. Marcus watched it on a small TV at home while Ava colored at the kitchen table. Cass stood at a podium with her hair pulled back, wearing a simple coat. Her face was pale, but her spine was straight. A reporter shouted, "Ms. Ashford, is it true you're involved with Marcus Reed?" Another yelled, "Are you paying him?" Cass waited for the noise to die down. Then she said calmly, "Marcus Reed saved my life." The crowd quieted. Cass continued, voice clear. "He didn't know who I was. He didn't ask for anything. He acted because he saw another human being in danger. I won't insult that act by hiding behind vague statements or pretending it didn't happen." A reporter pressed, "So you admit you're close?" Cass's eyes didn't flicker. "I admit we've spoken. I admit we've shared coffee. I admit we've been honest. If that bothers you, it's because you're more comfortable with lies." The room erupted again. Marcus stared at the screen, heart pounding. Ava looked up. "She's brave." Marcus didn't answer. Because bravery didn't always feel like a gift. Sometimes it felt like a storm. And storms hit the fragile hardest. That evening, Ava's cheeks flushed red at dinner. She pushed her food around without eating a sign Marcus recognized too well. "Ava," he said carefully. "Are you okay?" Ava shrugged. "Tired." Marcus touched her forehead. Heat. His chest tightened. "Ava," he said, voice too calm, too controlled, the voice of a man trying not to panic. "We're going to the hospital." Ava didn't protest. That scared him more than any tantrum ever could. At Riverton Children's Hospital, they ran tests quickly. Marcus paced. He checked his phone repeatedly without meaning to. Cass didn't know. Cass didn't need to know. Cass was chaos. And yet, when Marcus stepped out into the hallway, he almost collided with her. Cass stood there, hair damp from rain, wearing a plain sweater and jeans, no entourage, no camera crew. Just her. Marcus froze. "What are you doing here?" Cass's eyes were wide with worry. "Ava's school called my assistant. They said she was taken to the hospital. I came." Marcus's anger flared. "Why would her school have your Cass swallowed? I asked them to. As an emergency contact. Quietly. In case." Her voice cracked. "In case you ever needed help." Marcus's chest tightened so hard it hurt. "You overstepped," he said, but his voice lacked force. Cass nodded, eyes wet. "I did? And if you tell me to leave, I will. But I couldn't sit in my office and pretend I didn't care." Marcus stared at her words, caught behind the wall of his fear. A doctor stepped out then, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reed," the doctor said, "we need to talk about Ava." And the world narrowed to a single point. The doctor's words were clinical, careful, full of, "We're seeing changes and we need to adjust, and it's not what we hoped." Marcus heard them like distant thunder. All he could see was Ava's small body in the bed, sleeping under a blanket, eyelashes resting against her cheeks like fragile lines drawn in pencil. Marcus's hands shook so badly he shoved them into his pockets. Cass stood a few feet away, silent. She didn't try to speak. She didn't try to insert herself. She only stayed. When the doctor finished, Marcus nodded like he understood, even though part of him felt like he'd been ripped open. The doctor left. Marcus turned toward the wall, pressing his forehead against it for a moment, trying to breathe without breaking. Cass spoke softly. "Marcus." He didn't turn. Cass took a slow step closer. "Tell me what you need." Marcus's voice came out rough. "I need everyone to stop leaving." Cass's breath caught. Marcus finally turned, eyes shining with anger and grief and exhaustion. I lost Naomi. I can't lose Ava. I can't be the man who watches another person fade. Cass's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She held them like she held everything tight controlled. "You're not alone," she whispered. Marcus's laugh was broken. "I am." Cass hesitated, then did something Marcus didn't expect. She pushed up her sleeve. The scars on her arm caught the hospital light, pale, jagged, undeniable. They weren't pretty. They weren't symmetrical. They looked like truth. "I was alone," Cass said quietly. "For a long time." Marcus stared at her arm. Cass's voice trembled. "When I was 12, I woke up in a hospital bed and everyone told me I should be grateful I survived. No one asked me if I wanted to. No one asked me if I could live with it." Her throat tightened. "I built a company because it gave me something to control. It gave me a reason to keep moving. But I never healed. I just kept running." Marcus's chest tightened. Cass lowered her arm slowly. "You don't have to let me in," she said. "But I'm asking you don't push me away because you're afraid. Let me stand beside you while you're afraid." Marcus swallowed hard. Before he could answer, Ava's small voice floated from the doorway. Daddy Marcus spun. Ava stood there in her socks holding the edge of her hospital gown. Her face was pale. Her eyes were too bright. Marcus rushed to her immediately, kneeling. "Baby, you should be in bed." Ava's gaze flicked to Cass. "She's here." Cass's breath caught like she'd been caught doing something forbidden. Marcus tried to speak. "Ava." Ava stepped closer, voice quiet but steady. "You look like you're going to fall apart." Marcus blinked hard. Ava looked at Cass again, then back to Marcus. "Is she making you happy?" Marcus froze. Cass's eyes widened, shocked. Marcus tried to find words. It's complicated." Ava nodded like she understood too much already. "Everything is." She held out her hand, small fingers curling toward Cass like an invitation. Cass looked like she couldn't breathe. Marcus's throat tightened. "Ava." Ava didn't look away from Cass. "You helped my daddy," she said softly. "And you paid for my medicine." Cass's eyes filled her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to know." Ava tilted her head. Why Cass swallowed. "Because help shouldn't make you feel like you owe someone." Ava's mouth curved slightly. "Good. Because I don't owe you. But I like you." Cass's breath shuddered. Ava's voice became even softer, like a secret. "You make my daddy's eyes less sad." Marcus's heart cracked. Cass's tears finally fell quiet, unstoppable. Marcus reached for Ava, pulling her gently back toward the bed. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's get you warm." That night, Cass didn't leave. She sat in the chair beside Ava's bed, reading a children's book in a voice that was too careful at first, like she was afraid of doing it wrong, but slowly it warmed. It became real. Marcus watched from the doorway, arms crossed, exhaustion dragging him down. Cass looked up and caught his gaze. She didn't smile like a CEO. She smiled like someone learning how to belong. Over the next weeks, Cass became something Marcus didn't know how to categorize. She wasn't a savior. She wasn't a scandal. She wasn't a headline. She was present. She came to Marcus's small apartment not in designer suits, but in soft sweaters and jeans. She sat cross-legged on the floor with Ava and played board games like she didn't own a building. One Friday night, Cass brought pizza, cheap, greasy, perfect. They ate it on the living room floor because Marcus didn't have a dining table big enough, and Cass didn't care. Ava laughed when Cass got sauce on her thumb and tried to wipe it off with the back of her wrist like a child. Marcus watched that laugh like it was a sunrise. Later, when Ava fell asleep on the couch, Cass helped Marcus fold laundry. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was restful. Marcus finally spoke, voice quiet. "Why do you stay?" Cass didn't look up from the tiny sock she was folding. Because I want to. And because I don't know how to walk away from people I care about anymore. Marcus swallowed. You barely know us. Cass's fingers tightened on the sock. I know what it looks like when someone is fighting to keep living. Marcus's throat tightened. I'm not always strong. Cass finally looked up. Her eyes were steady. Neither am I, she said. I just learned how to look like it. Marcus stared at her, the words settling into him like warmth. A few days later, Cass asked Marcus to come with her to the river. Marcus hesitated. Why Cass's voice was quiet. Because I need to see it again, and not be alone. They went early in the morning when the city was still half asleep. The Evergreen River moved under Greystone Bridge, dark and steady. The air was cold enough to bite. Cass stood by the railing, hands gripping it hard. Marcus stood beside her, not too close, not too far. Cass stared down at the water. When I fell, it felt like the world stopped demanding things from me, she said quietly. It was quiet. For the first time in years. Marcus's chest tightened. Cass's voice cracked. And then you pulled me back. And I was angry at you for a second because I didn't want to come back to the noise. Marcus's hands curled against his sides. I'm sorry, he whispered before he could stop himself. Cass turned sharply. Don't be. Marcus met her gaze. Cass's eyes shone. Because now, the noise isn't the only thing I hear. Marcus's throat tightened. What do you hear? Cass looked toward the riverbank where a flock of birds lifted into the gray sky. I hear Ava laughing, she said. I hear a home. Marcus swallowed hard. Cass stepped closer, not into him, not into his space like a demand, but into the small distance like a question. Marcus didn't step back. He didn't step forward either. He simply stayed. And for Marcus Reed, staying was the bravest thing he'd done since he jumped into that river. Ava's health didn't become magically perfect. Life didn't tie itself into a neat bow. There were still appointments, still days of fatigue, still scares that made Marcus's hands shake in the dark. But there was something different now. There was Cass, sitting in waiting rooms with him, not speaking unless spoken to, offering her presence like a blanket. There was Ava curling against Cass's side while watching cartoons, her small fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of Cass's sleeve. One night, Ava whispered, "Can I see Cass?" Hesitated, then rolled her sleeve up without drama. Ava stared at the scars, eyes wide. "Does it hurt, Ava?" asked softly. Cass smiled, sad and gentle, not like it used to. Ava touched them carefully like she was touching proof of survival. Marcus watched, heart tight. Cass looked up at him, eyes soft. "I spent years thinking scars meant I failed," she said. Marcus's voice was quiet. "They mean you stayed." Cass exhaled like she'd been holding that breath since she was 12. And in that small apartment on a cheap couch under a flickering lamp with rain tapping the window like an old song, 3 people sat together. Not perfect, not saved, but real, and warm, and no longer alone. If this story touched a corner of your own memory, if you've ever felt like you had to carry everything alone, leave a comment as if you're placing a warm cup of cocoa into someone's hands on a cold night. You never know who needs it.